Áard Vera, a Hishig, a Privifagokna, Service Dotan, Conal Creedon, Scrivenor Cluta, August Norman O'Rourke, Peterborough. August Clockania, a Tog Ork, Eran Chairman Shaw, Erlina. The footage you have just seen evokes the burning of Patrick Street a century ago. My name is Liam Ronayne, and it is my privilege to welcome the speakers at this evening's ceremony and welcome all of you watching online. Beg me a corivor láthar, carhard caintóri. I gúpla nómacha, beg an Tád Vera ag Lordlin, agus in íg sin an Taoiseach Miall Martin TD. Taréis an Bertaco Siúd, beg príomh ifach an Service Dótán John Ryan, ag chuirsias Carahála an níos starúil ó fásach sin céad bliain ó hin. Agus faoiarra, Conal Creedon ag léamh ó Dír Bheithesnéis Frank O'Connor. Píosa mother leis an níos seo. 100 years ago this evening, on the night of the 11th and the morning of the 12th of December 1920, the commercial centre of Cork City and the group of civic buildings here on the south channel of the River Lee, City Hall and Carnegie Free Library, were destroyed in a premeditated attack by K Company of the Auxiliary Division of the RIC, along with a small number of RIC men and British soldiers. This was the culmination of a gathering storm of violence, repression met with resistance. While this was not the first time that Cork City was destroyed, as far back as Gaelic attacks on the Viking town and Marlborough's destruction of the city in 1690, it was by far the worst. But it is a testament to the spirit and resilience of the people of the city that within a matter of years, by 1927, Patrick Street had been rebuilt and the fine series of buildings that are still there were seen, followed in 1930 by the City Library on Grand Parade, and 6 years later, the City Hall here behind us. Much has been said and written about the causes of the burning of Cork and its aftermath, and more of that very shortly. Cork City Council has been very clear and focused in its investment in scholarship, publications, exhibitions and conferences to unearth new knowledge on the period 1913 to 1923 in order to deepen our understanding and learn what lessons we can. Agus an ish, cuireann fáilte ribh Áard Vera Corky an Córlór Joe Kavanagh.
In 1920 and 1921, Cork was, as historians have said, the cockpit of the Irish Revolution. In this city and county, there were more episodes, ambushes, attacks, raids than any other part of the country. In 1920, Cork had 9% of the population of the island of Ireland, but 34% of the active volunteers, 26% of the IRA's rifles, 25% of its pistols and 58% of its machine guns, all of them captured by volunteers in actions against Crown forces. By the end of the year, the RIC had to abandon 65% of its barracks in the city and county because of the people's resistance. More importantly, Cork was a national centre of resistance in other ways. The intellectual contributions of McSweeney, Liam de Rochta, McCurtain were invaluable in so many ways. At its first meeting, the newly elected Cork Corporation in January 1920 pledged allegiance to Dáil Éireann as the only legitimate seat of power in Ireland. I have the great honour, as Lord Mayor, of being successor in office to both Tomás McCurtain and Terence McSweeney. Both gave their lives for the cause they believed in. Tomás McCurtain was the first Republican Lord Mayor, elected in January 1920. He served for just over 2 months before being cruelly murdered in his own home in front of his wife and his family by elements of the RIC. The huge crowds at his funeral were testament to both the shock and revulsion felt by Cork people at his murder and the support which they had for the cause. Terence McSweeney succeeded him as Lord Mayor. They were comrades and friends, but quite different in many ways. McCurtain's interests were political, but also musical. He had formed the Blackpool Orchestra, for example, to play old Irish tunes and songs which had previously been neglected. McSweeney was a playwright and poet, and it was his cultural nationalism and his devotion to the Irish language which led him to get involved in the political struggle. When arrested by British soldiers in August 1920 here at City Hall, he refused to recognise the authority of what he saw as an alien force. He refused to take food and died after a hunger strike, lasting more than 2 months on the 26th of October of that year in Brixton Prison in London. Like McCurtain, his funeral attracted huge crowds and interest from all over the world. As well as being activists and intellectuals of the revolution, the great strength of Tomás McCurtain and Terence McSweeney, one which caught the attention of the wider world, was that they had a democratic mandate. They had been swept to elected office in the elections of January 1920, and when McCurtain was murdered, the shock in Ireland and abroad was all the greater because he was the first citizen of his city, and by the same token, when McSweeney refused to submit to an alien power, out of respect for his elected office, it also captured the imagination of Europe, North America, India, British colonies in Africa, and many parts of the world, even as far away as Vietnam. As I said at the outset, Cork saw more episodes in the War of Independence than any other part of the country, but the most catastrophic of all was the burning of Cork. This night, exactly 100 years ago, when our city was set aflame. It is our duty as descendants to sensitively acknowledge this night of destruction. And it is my honour to represent the citizens of Cork at tonight's commemorative ceremony, which is an important yet poignant milestone in this decade of centenaries. Thank you.
As the Lord Mayor said, we are honouring two of his predecessors tonight, Tomás McCurtain and Terence McSweeney, and our next speaker has also worn that historic chain. Cuireann fáilte roimh an Taoiseach, Micheál Martin Teach de Dála, a Taoiseach.
Ardmhéire na cathrach agus gcuine uisle go léir. Is cór agus is ceart go bhfuil míad bailithe le chéile an seo anocht. I gcuine na léachra a bhí freigrach as saoirsear agus neamhsplachas na tíre a bhrunna oring. Bliain stairiúil é seo. Caithfidh míad rá go raibh buint lárnach ag muintir na cathrach agus an chúnta seo ina imeachtaí cogadh na saoirse. Cé gur oling pobl chorcaí go mór le ling na tréimhse sin, ba léir gur thugadidir tacaíocht iomlán do ghlúiseacht na saoirse a bhí fiáin seoil in éideag is a fithe. Buaic faointe na follingte sin ná dó chorcaí ar an lá seo 100 bliain ó shin. Tás a gcuin go raibh an méid tacaíochta sin ann I gCorcaigh, mar sna tócháin áitiúla in éideag is a fithe, bhuaigh na poblachtánaigh tromlach cuimseach agus dá bhar na dócháin sin, tháinig glúin nua ceannairí chun chin ar nós Tomás McCurtain agus Tréalach McSweeney. Standing here this evening, it is important that we not only remember the momentous events that occurred in Cork City and County during the struggle for independence and afterwards, but pay homage to the revolutionary generation of Irish men and women who by their deeds and resilience helped forge what has become one of the oldest continuous democracies in the world. There are certain events in a nation's history that stand out in its struggle for independence. The burning of this city 100 years ago to this very evening is one such moment. It is embedded in the memory and consciousness of all Corkonians and stands there alongside the murder of Tomás McCurtain and the hunger strike, death and funeral of Terence McSweeney as elemental reminders of Cork's contribution to Ireland's struggle for independence. It is to the credit of that revolutionary generation that from the ashes of this burdened city, broken dreams and painful legacies, they went on to build the country we have today. The burning of Cork was an iconic moment in a period of great tumult and sacrifice. As we look back on the past, we should do so not through rose-tinted glasses, but through the measured eye of the discipline of history. We share an island where contested history, selective memory, and provocative assertions of identity can be barriers to mutual accommodation and the reconciliation necessary to our shared future. History can never be a dehumanized or simplistic self-serving narrative. It is the complex story of individual men and women, their lives, their flaws, their strengths, their struggle, and their suffering. As we face the challenges of the future, let us draw upon the sense of resilience and common purpose that underpinned the revolutionary generation of Cork a century ago. This city, the city of Finbar, has grown from the Viking marshes and burnt ruins of a century ago to being what it is today, a city of Europe on the Atlantic, looking outward and embracing diversity and change. We stand on the shoulders of that revolutionary generation. They are our inspiration, and we remember them this night. Let us summon the courage and resilience of the past to meet the challenges of now, to build a better future for tomorrow. Gura míle maith agaibh, go léir.
The Cork Fire Brigade faced not only burning buildings that night and morning, but also obstruction and intimidation from Crown forces. Cuireann Fáilte Riv John Ryan, Chief Fire Officer.
On the night of Saturday, the 11th of December 1920, there was an enforced curfew. It was against this background that the bells were set off at 10:30 p.m. The Superintendent of Cork Fire Brigade, Captain Hudson, was police forces to attend the fire at Grant's on St. Patrick's Street, which they managed to stop spreading to the English market. It had been a busy year for Cork Fire Brigade. The deliberate igniting of fires to cause civil unrest and interference with the Fire Brigade's efforts to extinguish them was commonplace. That night, there was to be no rest for the brigade, as Captain Hudson was informed at 11:30 p.m. that the Munster Arcade was on fire, followed shortly by Cash's and Roach's stores, all large department stores. These premises were well alight by the time crews arrived and could not be saved. The fire rapidly spread to 20 of the principal establishments on Patrick Street and 30 on the side streets. Cork Fire Brigade at that time had a full-time cohort of 10 members and 13 auxiliary members. Its equipment was basic, just 2 pumps, 1 steam, 1 manual, both drawn by horses. Several wheeled escapes were located about the city. Valuable assistance was provided by local volunteers such as Michael J. O'Mahony of John Daly and Company of Caroline Street, the makers of Tanora, the famous Cork soft drink. He had once been chief of the Cork Volunteer Fire Brigade. Alongside the managing director of Newsome's, they are both credited with saving the Victoria Hotel. Unfortunately, in the meantime, the fire had spread to and destroyed Daly Store. At 1:40 a.m, firefighters on duty at City Hall reported shots being fired and were driven from the building. By 4 a.m, City Hall and the Carnegie Library were on fire. At 5:40 a.m, the clock tower at City Hall had collapsed. During the night, members of the brigade were impeded, shot at, hoses were cut and damaged. There was constant danger of building collapse and falling debris. Several firefighters were injured, requiring hospitalisation, some with bullet wounds. In his report, Captain Hudson stated, "It is remarkable that the military never brought any fire appliances whatever, as they'd done on nearly all previous occasions up to the last few months. I must say that prior to these incendiary fires, the military frequently rendered us valuable assistance. Extensive use was made of the city water mains that night, with the Lee Waterworks proving invaluable. By 8 a.m. on the 12th of December, the extent of the fires was partially under control. Fire crews were exhausted, but the fight was not over, and firefighting operations had to continue in uncertain conditions. Assistance was requested. Limerick Fire Brigade sent 3 firefighters and equipment. Dublin Fire Brigade sent Chief Officer Captain Myers with a pumping appliance and 7 firefighters. They assisted Cork Fire Brigade until Wednesday. It took Cork City Fire Brigade a week to dampen down all the fires in the city centre. Captain Myers in a later interview stated, "I saw at once this was no ordinary fire. Incendiary bombs had undoubtedly been used. In ordinary accidental fires, most of the walls remained standing. Here the whole place literally collapsed like a house of cards." The fireground is a dangerous environment. In the fire service, we continually change our strategies and tactics to accomplish our mission. But our goals remain the same as 100 years ago, to save life and protect property. And now as then, we do this with the support of other agencies. We in Cork City Fire Brigade are privileged to follow in the footsteps of Captain Alfred J. Hudson and the firefighters who gallantly fought to control this conflagration on the streets of Cork. We can only stand in awe at their fortitude and bravery, and we humbly salute them. Indeed, descendants of some of these firefighters continue to serve this city in the brigade today.
The great Irish writer Frank O'Connor witnessed the events in 1920, and to read an extract from his autobiography, please welcome Conal Creedon.
The Lord Mayor, Thomas McCurtain, was murdered by the English police in his own home before the eyes of his wife. Another Lord Mayor, Terence McSweeney, was elected to his place promptly and arrested. He went on hunger strike and died in Brixton jail. Mother and I were among those who filed past his coffin as he lay in state in Cork City Hall in his volunteer's uniform. The long, dark, masochistic face I had seen only a few months before as he chatted with Corkery by the new bridge. Years later, I talked with a little country shopkeeper from North Cork who had organised a company of volunteers in his hometown, and been so overawed by the tall, dark young man who cycled out from the city to inspect them that he was too shy to ask where McSweeney was spending the night. Long after, cycling home himself, he saw someone lying in a field by the roadside, and getting off, he found McSweeney asleep in the wet grass with nothing but an old raincoat around him. The vision of McSweeney had haunted him through the years of disillusionment. Curfew was imposed, first at 10, then at 5 in the afternoon. The bishop excommunicated everyone who supported the use of physical force, but it went on just the same. One night, shots were fired on our road and a lorry halted at the top of the square. An English voice kept screaming hysterically, my back, but no one could go out through the wild shooting of panic-stricken men. Soon after, the military came in force, and from our back door we saw a red glare mount over the valley of the city. For hours, father, mother and I took turns at standing on a chair in the attic, listening to the shooting and watching the whole heart of the city burn. Father was the most upset of us, for he was full of local pride and ready to take on any misguided foreigner or Dublin Jackeen who was not prepared to admit the superiority of Cork over all other cities. Next morning, I wandered among the ruins. It was not the business district or the municipal buildings that I mourned, but the handsome red brick library that had been so part of my life from the time when, as a small boy, I brought back my first Western adventure story over the railway bridges. Later, I stood at a corner by Dillon's Cross, where the ambush had been and saw a whole block of little houses demolished by a British tank. One had been the home of the old patriot whom my grandparents called Brynny Dill. A small, silent crowd was held back by soldiers as the tank lumbered across the pavement and thrust at the wall until at last it broke like a pie crust and rubble and rafters tumbled. It made a deep impression on me. Always it seemed to be the same thing. The dark, shrunken face of McSweeney in the candlelight and the walls of that burst thrust by the tank. The splendour falls, and there is no such thing in business as an out-and-out free gift. It was like a symbolic representation of what was always happening to myself. And it seems as though Ireland did not stand as much a better chance. The material world was too strong for the both of us.
The ceremony this evening is, of course, a much scaled-down one from what the city expected and what the council had planned to deliver. Alas, the pandemic intervened. The high point was to have been a state ceremonial event to honour Cork's leading role in the fight for independence and to mark the lives and deaths of Tomás McCurtain and Terence McSweeney and many others, timed to coincide with the centenary of McSweeney's funeral. Around the same time, there was to have been a community participation event in the city centre, bringing together all the local community and heritage groups in the city who wish to make their own contributions, as well as public lecture series and exhibitions, site-specific displays, and a mini film festival with documentaries and features on the period. These obviously could not take place, but thankfully much of the scholarship and publication planned and supported by the Council has been able to proceed. The Council will consider what might still take place in 2021, the 101st anniversary of these events. The greatest tribute that the present generation can make to McCurtain, McSweeney, the Wallace sisters, Tig Barry, and all the others, perhaps less well known, is to dedicate ourselves to living up to the principles they stood for and stand for, strengthening democracy at local and national levels, real self-determination in all its aspects, and building a republic that delivers for everyone. Agwini Ushla, could have Mina Mahagad us to Ard, and I now call on Piper Norman O'Rourke to close the ceremony.